And it looks like we're live. If anybody's listening in on the Slack channel and give us a thumbs up, that'd be really great. And okay, we are live. Okay, great. Sorry, everybody, about that false start. Welcome to the Heptio Ark office hours for September 2018. First Tuesday of every month, we basically grab a bunch of Ark developers, and I've got to make sure I'm muted here. And we ask them a bunch of questions. We talk about milestones and roadmaps, and basically just kind of give people a clue of what's happening in Ark and give you an opportunity to ask user questions and things like that. So let's get started. We'll do quick introductions. I'm George Castro. I'm the community manager at Heptio, and I'll be kind of hosting the meeting.
I'm Andy Goldstein. I'm the project lead for Ark, and I'm also with Heptio.
I'm Nolan Brubaker. I'm a systems engineer at Heptio working on Ark.
I'm Dave Parfit. I'm an SRE at Mozilla, and I'm a user of Ark and a fan.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for joining us, Dave. As always, these meetings, we put these, we invite the calendar entry. We invite everyone on the list to come hang out, listen, ask questions if you want, or just passively sit. We do archive these on YouTube, so they're available for anyone if you want to go back and listen to some of the older ones. So we've had a bunch of changes in Ark this past month, mostly from a project management perspective. So Nolan, I was wondering if you could walk us through some of the changes here as far as PM.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that show up for everybody?
Probably need to make the font 2 or 3 times bigger.
There we go.
There we go.
That's better.
Probably have to scroll a little bit, but so this is ZenHub. This is a Kanban, Scrum, Agile board interface for showing GitHub issues, and we're using this to kind of organize our work and kind of plan things around features and epics and big stories. Mm-hmm. So we've got some of the typical Kanban kind of columns and phases, new issues for brand new issues, Icebox for issues that are kind of put on the back burner. The backlog is things that we'll be pulling out of for setting up the next sprint, and the sprint backlog is the current sprint or the current release that we're working on. And I'll go through a couple of these in a little bit. In progress is PRs or issues that people are working on that are not quite ready for review. Review QA are open PRs that need to be reviewed in QA. Done and closed are almost synonymous. Done will be for any GitHub issues that are finished but maybe aren't merged into master in a feature branch or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then closed are closed out issues. You'll notice some of these, scroll, some of these are labeled as epics. Basically, these are real high level issues that are then broken down into smaller individual issues that we'll actually work on. So this one's for backup replication, which is something of a long-term goal for Ark. In the Google Doc that we have for the stream, we also have a guide from one of our PMs here at Heptio talking about how to use ZenHub with Ark.
So a few questions here without spoiling too much of the README before. Mm-hmm. So is this link from the README and it's available in public to everybody? They can just click through, right? And just
this should be available in public. If you have a, let me open it up here. If you have a plugin installed in your browser, mm-hmm. You'll have a ZenHub tab added in GitHub, and it'll basically do the whole thing in GitHub's UI.
Okay.
So yeah, this should be public and for anybody to see. We're not putting this behind any kind of paywall or anything like that.
Right. And each of these cards then, does that correspond to a GitHub issue or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. So this is really just a rendering of what's in the GitHub.
Right.
There are some specific fields that, like the column and links between like an epic and its subcards. Like you'll notice this past dry run flag to plugins. That's got two
Can you
epics.
increase the font size on that?
Yeah. This right here. You can see my mouse moving. Number 654. If I click through to that, it'll show it as a GitHub issue, and it will have the epics associated over here. That stuff's in ZenHub, but
Okay.
all the main stuff is still the tags and labels, assignees, all of that stuff is still in GitHub.
Okay. So as far as users are concerned, they just keep using GitHub like normally. And then if they have an issue, they can just look at the ZenHub and maybe see what column it's in. And then you can have a conversation with someone depending on, you know.
Yeah, so this is a way for us to work with our product management as well as the development team and the community to visualize priorities and take advantage of some of the additional metadata that ZenHub allows you to put on there, such as epics, so that we can see what are we going to work on next, what have we prioritized, what haven't we prioritized yet. So anything that's in the new issues column, that's where new issues will go. So whether it's somebody from Heptio or someone from the community creating an issue, that's where it starts. And we will go through and do grooming, where we take a look at everything that's in the new issues column and ultimately either move it to the icebox or the backlog. You will see that we have 106 new issues at the moment. Some of them are things that probably should be moved to the backlog because they're ones that we created a while ago that we plan on doing and just haven't gotten to yet. But it takes time. There's a lot of things there. So we'll be going through them over the next several weeks and try and get that moved appropriately.
Sure. And there's no correlation on this axis as far as priority, right? Those are all by labels?
Well, so we had labels before we started using ZenHub that represented priority. And the difficulty with using those labels is that there's no sorting other than we know what's P0, and that's the most important. We know there's a batch of things that are P1, which are maybe slightly less important, and then P2 and so on. And there's no way to tell just by using those labels what that relative prioritization is. So one of the things that we will be doing is using the order that you see them in ZenHub to represent what we want to work on first, second, third, and so on. So we may still use the P0, P1 labeling, probably just P0 really to mean this is absolutely critical and we have to do it now. But anything beyond that should be sorted in relative priority.
Yep. And as this kind of first test run for the first release that we're using ZenHub the whole way through, we've just been focusing on the sprint backlog for right now. So that should be more or less in priority order.
Sure. I've got another question as well, but I just want to welcome all of you that are joining us as the stream. If you're joining us now, this is the Heptio Ark office hours. Feel free to throw questions in #ark-dr on Kubernetes Slack if you have any questions about using Ark or this board that Nolan just showed. We're going to keep on talking. When there's no questions, we're just going to keep on talking about Ark stuff and milestones and all this stuff. Can you kind of explain to me what would be the difference then between a sprint backlog and a backlog? Like when you say sprint, is that like an event where you all will be like kind of like a classical sprint where you all travel a place?
We have not been doing classical sprints in that we're not saying every 3 weeks we have a chunk of work and it starts on day 1 and ends on day 15 and that's what we're going to do. It's more, at least for right now, what are we working on for our next version that we're going to release, which will be 0.10. we may change this over time. It's more just a way to distinguish between, so for example, if we take these 106 new issues and let's say that 90 of them make their way into the backlog, that would put us over 100 issues in the backlog. And so having a long list of items that have been prioritized and scoped that we plan to do, and then having a separate list of here's the next few tasks that the team should be working on. It's really just a way to sort of cut the top off of the backlog and move it into another column that says like, this is what we're planning on doing right now.
So if there's a bug, or sorry, if there's an issue or feature or software fix or whatever that I want to keep track of, if it's in the sprint backlog, it's probably coming next release or two then, right? Those are the priority ones then?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know, good to know. What is there anything else in here that I can glean? As opposed to before, I think we just had a README that was like,
yeah, before we had it, we had a roadmap that was kind of rough, and it was basically trying to outline what our plans were for the next few releases. But this helps us approach it in a little bit more structured manner. We'll probably end up removing the roadmap .md file from the repo, just because it's already reflected here.
Right.
So you can also do filtering by like milestones. Right now, we just have very large buckets. Stuff for v1.0.0, which we want to get in for v1 before launching v1. v0.10.0 is the next major release, and v0.9.4 is a bug fix release that should be coming out this week.
Okay, so really, assuming 1.0 further down the road, we've got the point release, and then 0.10 would be the next major release that we care about. So that's a great segue then into what's happening with releases. So let's talk point release first, because people are using the 0.9 series, and this is kind of like the production stuff. You had mentioned earlier while we were prepping for the cast that we had a bunch of bug fixes going in and things like that. So do you want to review those, or does this? Oh, related question is, so will a board like this enable that you just go back and select milestone 0.94 and show them all, assuming you were using it?
Yeah, it should.
Yeah, you just have to scroll over to what's in review and what's done.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll just segue into what we're doing for 0.94, because that will be in 0.10 as well. We found two issues largely related to plugins. One was that we found, community member found that having a lot of schedules and backups was causing high memory usage on their cluster, and was then basically running out of memory for the Ark server was running out of memory and would crash. So Andy and Steve took a look through how our plugins were working on the different backups, and found we weren't actually closing all the plugins until the servers shut down. So now we clean up plugins as their work is finished, resulting in more stable, or at least slower, memory climb. The second one was causing annotation. So when you were restoring a backup with a plugin that added annotations to your object, then it would panic and crash the Ark server. So we fixed a bug where we will respect those annotations correctly.
And looking at the title there, is that a DigitalOcean only problem in the plugin?
No,
or
this was any restore if you have any restore plugin enabled that touches annotations on the way in. So taking your backup and restoring it into the cluster, you can have a plugin inspect that backup and do something to it. And our examples add annotations, and these happen to be running, and that then crashed the server. So it was a bug in specifically merging stuff with service accounts that needed to be fixed, but it would apply to anything that was being restored.
Okay. All right, so that looks like that's basically it for the point release. Any idea? So it looks like it's merged. Just talk me through, how does a point release work? Is there?
So what we'll do, you'll see that there's still one outstanding pull request where we are going to update the changelog to indicate what is coming in that release. And once we've done that and we go through the machinations to cut a release and get everything out the door, it will be available. We had most of this stuff lined up for last week, but it was getting close to Friday, and one of our team members, Steve, was taking some time off, and we just didn't want to combine Friday and vacation and being a bit shorthanded with trying to put a release out. Plus, it's a long weekend that we're just
right.
So this week we will get 0.9.4 published when we have cleared off the long weekend cobwebs and go through the paces here to get that out.
All right, awesome. Okay, and then after that, the next major release is 0.10. Do we have a timeline? Like, are we talking next month-ish? You don't have to commit to anything, Andy. You can just give me a clue.
So I unfortunately don't have a good answer for that because I have been off working on a side project at Heptio on some other things. So Nolan is probably in a better place to talk about what's going into 0.10, mainly because he's been directly involved with it for the past month or so.
Excellent.
Yeah. So for delivery, we're hoping within September.
Okay.
That's the goal. What's coming in 0.10 was we were originally planning to include backup replication, where you can replicate backups from one region in a cloud provider to another region, depending on the cloud provider. Some of them don't need regions for some of that.
Now, would that be region to region, or is it down then back up?
Region to region.
Okay.
Yep. So it would not download it to Ark and then re-upload it somewhere. It would use the APIs available, and also have plugin support if new providers wanted to implement their own logic for that. But in scoping it out, we've taken, I think people who've tuned in before and maybe been following Ark have seen that the replication stuff has been baking for a while, and we decided to kind of break it up a little bit and make smaller releases. So the first thing we added, which is a lot of it is in the closed column right now, is adding backup locations. So Ark had this config object that said you're going to put all the backups in object storage here. What we did was we pulled that out of the config and made it its own type of CRD. So now you are able to define multiple buckets that Ark can send backups to. They're not replicated between each other now,
right?
But you can set up. You can have a bucket in US East 1 or US East 2, and then choose between them with like a schedule.
Okay.
So that stuff has merged as of, I think, last week or maybe the week before. We've also, something we're currently reviewing is making sure Ark can use subdirectories in object storage. Before we had to use the root of the object store. And the next big thing we're working on now is volume locations. So being able to move volume snapshots between provider regions or clusters, depending on what the provider is. And then down below, we just have some other miscellaneous things that we need to update. Big thing coming in 0.10 is Andy and Steve worked on making our plugins resumable and updating the plugin model so that we can do multiple plugins in one process.
Yeah, so that actually is pretty big and worth calling out.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time, I sliced and diced the way that we were setting up plugins previously, and what is going to happen in 0.10 is each backup or restore or sync that we're doing will be using its own set of plugin instances, and that wasn't always the case before then. We also, what led into this refactoring was someone, I think their plugin might have run out of memory. And so Ark was running, and then it started a plugin, and the plugin crashed. And Ark didn't detect that the plugin had crashed. It certainly didn't restart the plugin, and it didn't restart itself. So what you had was backups would work, or restores would work up to a certain amount of time or a certain period of time. And then when that plugin crashed, any attempt to do additional backups or restores or syncs was met with errors. And Ark would just continuously say, backup failed, here's the error, or restore failed, and so on. And so right now in master and coming in 0.10, this has been completely revamped so that Ark will detect if a plugin has crashed and restart it. And also, as Nolan mentioned, rather than having one executable file per plugin with a name-based convention for Ark to determine if a given plugin was an object store plugin or a block store plugin or a backup item action plugin and so on, now you can combine as many plugins as you want into a single executable file. And we have a nice, easy helper function that you can call when you are starting up your plugin that registers all of the plugins that are contained in your file, and it tells them back to the Ark server. So the flow is essentially Ark starts up, it starts up the plugin process, and it queries the plugin to ask it, what are all of the plugin implementations that you have? So you could have 3 backup item action plugin instances and a couple of restores and a block and a volume, and you can combine them all in a single file, and Ark will just figure that out automatically and be able to use them.
I do have a question before we move on to some of the features about the multiple locations. So does that mean I could set up, I don't know, let's just say 5 buckets, 2 in Amazon, East, West, 3 in Google Cloud, Central, East, West, or whatever. And so do we push to those serially? Does it like, what can I set up that way? Does it just copy to all those locations? Can I set up kind of like, I want on the East Coast certain times of the week? And
so right now, you can't copy between them yet. Right. What'll happen is one backup will go to one bucket, or the schedule will send its backups to that bucket. The idea once we get replication going is it will be cloud provider specific. So if you're on Amazon, it will stay in Amazon. If you're in Google, it will stay in Google. It's not really a design goal right now to allow that replication to go across cloud.
Right.
It's also worth mentioning that replication, when it's available, is an optional feature, and we wanted to make the Ark user experience consistent with what we have today, which is fairly simple. As Nolan mentioned, we're moving the backup storage location out of the config object and into a separate one, but that should be a lateral change. And if you don't want to do replication, you do a backup storage location instead of a config. You start up Ark, you tell it you want to create a backup, and it backs up to that one storage location, and you're done. And there's really no substantive difference in the user experience. It's just a minor change as to how you define the bucket. So we wanted to retain that user experience. And to your question, George, does Ark send it serially or in parallel? It all goes back to that easy user experience where the backups are going to go to one place and only one place. And if you decide that you want to send it elsewhere and have a replicated copy, that's an additional layer that Ark will provide on top, and it's optional. So all of your backups could go to your East bucket by default. And then if you have the replication policy turned on and you've created one, then it would replicate from East to West, or wherever it needs to go.
Right, because it's probably easier to copy those files over inside a cloud than it is to run another full backup and then push to the other. Okay.
And the other thing is right now, there's no good way to get volume backups across clouds. Like you could take a whole file system level backup with Restic, and then you would be pushing that up to the cloud bucket somewhere, and then you have to re-download it on the other cloud. But for right now, we're going to keep the volume snapshots in the same cloud and move those between regions if we have to, depending on the provider and their specific implementations.
Okay, that answers my question. Those of you just listening in, we're in #ark-dr taking questions if you have any. So it's not just me, but that's okay. I was thinking about it really interesting because like it's like, well, you know, do we want to get in the just kind of thinking out loud is like, do we want to get into the hey, we're gonna try to do all this fancy stuff, or it's like just set a bucket and then it's kind of up to me as an operator to figure out what scheme I want to use and how I'm going to move stuff around, right? As opposed to trying to.
Yeah. And I would say like one aspect of that mental calculus is that if you go with Ark's 2B API, then you have a consistent way for setting up that replication, whether you're on clouds A, B, or C, versus if you don't take advantage of what we'll be providing, then you do have to figure it out yourself. You may be able to take advantage of certain cloud-specific features that we can't do with a lowest common denominator,
right,
or whatnot, but we hope that we can provide a consistent API that works across all the different storage and cloud providers, and that it is enough for what everybody needs to do.
Right. And
yep, and something I'll add is we had sent a draft of the design. The file name's still draft, but it's pretty much what we're implementing. That was sent to the Heptio Ark Google group, and I can drop a link to that in the notes for this episode.
That would be awesome. And Dave had to go, so he's going to drop. But it looks like we have Carlicia here. If you want to introduce yourself real quick, you can kill your screen sharing for 1 second, Nolan. There you go. All right, Carlicia, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carlicia Pinto, and I joined Heptio 2 months ago, and I work on Ark. So hit us on Slack and ask for help, and I don't know, we're here to help.
Yeah, and you just got back from GopherCon, it looks like. Did you have a good time?
Yes, I'm catching up because it was GopherCon crazy mode last week.
Okay, so we just covered replication coming in .10, and then Nolan is just kind of walking us through what we can expect in .10. And I'll go ahead and make sure that the notes have that replication design doc for those of you that are interested in checking it out. And so I guess reshare your board again, Nolan.
I can find the buttons.
It is at the bottom in the middle. There it is.
So I haven't seen any questions come in either on Slack or the shared Google Doc. I would wager that being the first day back from a long weekend, we probably, just don't have a ton of people right now.
Yeah, and we should definitely corner
a question on the YouTube chat.
Do we?
Yeah. So actually, this question was about can it support volume from NFS and Ceph instead of an S3 bucket? So that actually does lead me into something we updated recently. We have provided I'm on the right branch. We've provided a support matrix that we're going to keep updated. So the short answer is it could, but right now what's built in are AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud support for block storage and their volume snapshot providers. We're also compatible with S3 backup storage providers that have an S3 compatible API. And we have a couple contributed, or maybe not contributed, but plugins that other people have made for their platform. So Portworx and StackPoint Cloud has developed a set of DigitalOcean plugins. So if you want to send somewhere that's not object storage, you can certainly look into creating a plugin, and we can help advise you with that.
I would say one of the major requests that we've had was about sending to Git, for example, to GitHub or whatever Git hosting you have. The way that we have designed the API right now for uploading backups and downloading backups when you want to do a restore is highly aligned with an object storage interface. So there's the idea that a backup ultimately turns into a single file, which for what we do right now is a gzip compressed tar file. And when the backup is completed, that tar file is uploaded to S3. And then when you want to do a restore, the tar file is downloaded from S3 or Azure Blob Storage or Google Cloud Storage. So if we wanted to send the backup to NFS or Ceph or anything else that doesn't have an S3 compatible or Azure or Google compatible storage interface, it would require some additional design work and changes to Ark. I think we would be interested to hear anyone who would like to do something like that, whether it's Git or just a regular file system or whatnot. And we would need to work together to try and figure out the best way to update the API so that we can support or continue to support the storage that we have right now for object storage, and then additionally support non-object storage interfaces too.
Would it be, I'm just thinking about what a horrible idea this might be. Could I use the Restic interface to just dump something onto Ceph or NFS using just a file system backend?
Yeah, so
is that a good idea?
So yes, but there's two things here. So when we create a tar file and gzip compress it and upload it to one of the backup storage providers that's that Nolan has listed on the screen here, this is a file that contains all of your Kubernetes manifests. So it's actually the JSON file, or the JSON files for pods, secrets, namespaces, services, service accounts. It's everything that you can kubectl get and kubectl create goes into this tarball that's sent to the backup storage provider. So that's what we mean by backup storage. For volume snapshots, that is more with what you were just asking, George. And we can do native snapshots for EBS volumes, Azure Managed Disks, Google Compute Engine disks, and then we have the Portworx and DigitalOcean plugins for those specific storage types. And then we have Restic. Restic is the most generic of any and all of these volume snapshot providers. It works with every single Kubernetes volume type except host path. And as long as your pod has a volume and it's not using just a directory in the container, then we can snapshot it with Restic. And that does go to object storage or whatever Restic supports. And then when we get around to doing replication, we'll be able to replicate those Restic snapshots, and then you can restore from those as well.
Yeah, and he goes on to ask, how about local disks, local hard drives? So that probably...
So there's two local aspects to Kubernetes. There's there's more than two, but host path, where you take a directory that's on your node and that gets mounted directly into your pod. We don't support that. The main justification for not doing it is that it would require that we mount the entire root file system of the node into the pod that that we wrote and to do the Restic snapshots. We just feel that it's an unnecessary extreme granting of privileges to mount the entire root file system of the node into the Ark Restic pod. So instead of doing the entire node's file system, we do the kubelet pod volume directory, which tends to be var lib kubelet pods, I think. So the surface of what the Ark Restic pod has access to is limited to just those volumes that the kubelet deals with. So we don't do host path, but for local storage, empty dir, for example, is an ephemeral local storage option that Kubernetes provides. We can certainly take a snapshot of that with Restic. There's also a new local storage type that I think is beta in either Kubernetes 1.10 or 1.11, where it's scoped to the node wherever your pod lands, but it's not an empty dir storage. It's a different type that can be provisioned with the persistent volume claim mechanism, and we do support that, and it'll work with Restic.
Okay, Thunderhill, thanks for your question. Hopefully that answers it. There was one from earlier, from Abinur Tooney. Says, hello, I'm an SRE from Takama Holding at the Middle East. Hello. He asks, how long does something spend in the sprint section in the little board there? And then he says, 2 weeks, question mark? And I got the impression that it's like between one release and another.
Yes, it'll stay in the sprint backlog as long as everyone on the development team is occupied with something else. So if everybody's working on something, then the sprint backlog is going to stay as it is. And then when Nolan or Carlesia or anybody else on the team finishes up a task, they would pick whatever's in the sprint backlog and work on that next. And we mentioned earlier about not having any real definition of a sprint from a time aspect. And I'll just reiterate that we're evolving how we do this, but for right now, the things that are in the sprint backlog tend to represent what we hope to accomplish for our next release.
And I'm assuming once you grab something from the sprint backlog, do you self-assign it, or like who do I bother if I see something and I'm like, I wonder?
Yeah, the assignee. So if assuming it's an issue, which it most likely will be, whoever's working on it will assign that to themselves, and that would be the person or people to go bug if you want to know the status.
Awesome. All right, moving on. Ellie asks, hello all, is it possible to restore an Ark backup with volumes from one GCP project to another? When I describe a restore, I get this error, and that's in the #ark-dr channel if you want to check out that error. He goes, note, I already added permissions to the Ark service account, even tried owner permission, but still the same. Thanks in advance. Thanks for your question. Any ideas on this one?
Yeah, so this relates to the replication aspect and the backup locations aspect. And right now the answer is no. Although Nolan and Carlesia, I would defer to you on what sort of advances we've made with the backup locations work as to whether or not that would work in 0.10 or if it needs a little bit more development to make that happen.
Yeah, so this is for persistent volumes, which we haven't quite tackled yet. That's on the agenda to get started today or this week, depending on how today goes. But yeah, that's something we'll have to investigate. As of right now, I don't think copying between projects is supported, but that's something we're hoping to have a solid answer on at least by the time we get done with v0.10.
And then Andy's just checking to see if they're watching the live stream. We have a few minutes left, so if you're listening in on the live stream, you can ask your questions on #ark-dr or in the YouTube chat. We're watching that as well. And someone will just type out that answer to Ellie so they get the text answer while participating. So while we're waiting for questions and It looks like Andy's typing the answer to him or her. Is there anything else on the 0.10 roadmap that we should be looking at? So it sounds like a lot of the replication. Is it safe to call 0.10 the replication release? Is this something that do people ask for this a lot? I would assume so, right?
We have an old
replication release.
We have an old issue. I believe it was number 103 for supporting multi-region restores and backups, and we ultimately turned that issue into our replication epic issue. But the team worked together to try and scope out smaller chunks of work than just saying, all the replication, make it happen. Right. So the first phase is to support multiple backup locations at the specification level. So you can specify my backup should go to a bucket in US East 1, if you're on Amazon, for example. And then a different backup could go to a different bucket in a different region, but there's no replication at that point. It's just, I have the option to use more than one bucket so like one backup goes to one bucket, a different backup goes to a different bucket. When we do add replication, which probably will be after 0.10, mainly so that we can continue to get releases out the door that they'll include bug fixes, they'll include new features such as multiple backup locations. That would be 0.10. 0.11 will have replication. That would be the main feature for that, building on top of the backup locations work in 0.10.
Okay.
Yeah, and for other things to keep on top of with v0.10, that the one thing I'll call out for the plugin changes was a breaking API change. So we're updating our examples. We're going to have versioned examples for that now, so that people will know, hey, this branch of the plugins is not going to work with prior versions of Ark, and we'll be getting those getting the necessary changes up, or what you would need to change, and the documentation up before we do the release. But it's not huge. It's mostly with registering your plugins.
Okay, so sounds like a lot of good stuff coming then. Yeah. Do we call 0.11 the replication? Why don't we wait until we cross that bridge before making any promises? But it sounds like some good stuff there. Ali says, awesome, thanks. Any time frame for that? Nolan says sometime in September, likely later in the month. That's for 0.10. And then Ali says, cool, thank you all. Keep up the great work, Heptio Ark team. So great job, guys. So this brings us to anything else left on the board there that you wanted to talk about then?
I would just reiterate what we've talked about in the past, where we welcome anybody to come and contribute, and contributions can range all across the board. So assistance with documentation, end-to-end testing, which we have wanted to do for a long time, for automated end-to-end testing, and we just haven't gotten to it. We have lots of GitHub issues labeled either good first issue or help wanted. We also, as we've mentioned, have our Slack channel. We have a Google group that's a publicly accessible and joinable Google group. We would love to have everybody join and ask questions there. A lot of times we've seen several questions come into Slack for what's overnight for those of us in the US, and sometimes we may miss some of those. So it would be great to see questions like that posted to the Google group, just so we make sure we don't miss them, and that we can get an answer to those of you who ask that way.
Yeah, and something Ross and I have been talking about as well is kind of breaking these out. So we've been using these as basically to answer people's questions and things like that. But people also do have questions of what's coming in the release and things like that. So Ross is like, we should just have a community meeting that's just basically actively discussing these things that anyone could join. So we will definitely be adding that. Don't worry, we'll still be keeping around the office hours to do the release stuff. And if you have any feedback for us as far as how you're using Ark, or if there's any pain points, or you've heard the team discuss how user experience is important to them and keeping that consistent over release and release, we always want to hear feedback, positive or negative, even if it's, I never have to worry about that. That would also help us out. But definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we'll continue to be doing these office hours. And as always, we do post everything that we'll be discussing on the list. So we'll have a community meeting where we'll hop on there. We'll probably do a bunch of status updates, and you can just basically follow along your favorite features that we've discussed. And with that, we're basically almost running out of time. Let's do a last call for questions. Thanks those of you that have participated. And I wanted to thank Dave, but he left already, for joining in.
George, when do we have the next one of these scheduled? Is it in a month?
It is exactly in a month. One of the items I took down is we need to update the README for two things. We need to mention that we're doing these every Tuesday now, and I'll work up a PR on that today. And then we should probably unlink or remove roadmap.md. We're linking to the ZenHub thing, which is cool, and I think that's replicated, so that's just vestigial, I think. But yeah, what I'll do is every month I'll do the same thing that we did last month. When there's a new meeting, I'll basically invite the entire Google group mailing list. That way people can join if they want. They can get the notification. Those of you listening, we do these for Heptio Ark, Sonobuoy, and a bunch of other stuff on this channel along with TGIK. So if you click on the little subscribe bell, you'll just get a little notification when any one of the Heptio channels go live. We usually run a splash screen for 5 to 10 minutes to allow you to sit down and grab a drink and get ready, and then we go live into the content. And as always, you'll find the archive of this and any of our meetings on the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Heptio. Any final comments from our panelists?
Thanks for moderating, George.
Nolan, anything to say?
Yeah, thanks, George, and thanks people for tuning in, and thanks to Dave, even though he had to take off early.
All right, Carlicia?
Just glad we're doing this, and sorry I joined in late. I got.
It's all good.
But this is great. It's great to have.
Right? So great. And with that, thank you, everyone, and we'll see everyone next month. Bye.